The rain came down in knives that night, slashing through the cracked roof of the garage. Dean wiped the back of his hand across his forehead, smearing grease across his already stained skin. The cold had settled into his bones hours ago, but he stayed crouched over the battered pickup, tightening a stubborn bolt that just wouldn't listen. "Hey, hello." The voice was a whisper, barely audible over the rain hammering against the tin walls. Dean jerked up, heart hammering in his chest. His eyes caught movement near the door, a figure, soaked to the bone, shivering violently. A woman. She couldn't have been older than 25, wearing nothing but a thin hoodie and torn jeans, her sneakers squelching with every step. Water streamed down her face, her dark hair glued to her forehead. She looked like she had been running. From what? Dean didn't know. "I'm sorry, I didn't know where else to go," she chattered, voice shaking as much as her hands. "I saw the lights on." Dean glanced around. His garage was a dump. Leaking roof, rusty tools, a half-finished engine block taking up half the floor. Not exactly the Ritz. But hell, this wasn't the kind of night to turn anyone away. Especially not someone looking so wrecked, so lost. Without a second thought, he yanked off his jacket, the only dry thing he had, and shoved it into her arms. "Here, put this on. You're in a freeze." The woman stared at him, blinking like she couldn't believe the kindness. Her hands shook harder when she clutched the jacket to her chest. Dean scratched the back of his head awkwardly. I don't have much, but if you need to crash for the night, there's a cot in the back. It's not fancy, but it's dry. Safer than out there." Tears pooled in her eyes, but she blinked them back fiercely. She nodded, muttering a broken, "Thank you," before stumbling toward the corner where a torn-up mattress sat behind an old engine stand. Dean watched her collapse onto it like a puppet whose strings had been cut. She didn't even pull the blanket over herself, just curled up, clutching his jacket like it was a lifeline. He stood there for a long moment, the rain hammering outside, the cold gnawing at him, before he turned back to the broken pickup. His stomach twisted with something he couldn't name. Anger, pity, a dark, raw sense of knowing that the world could be a cruel, heartless place sometimes. He muttered under his breath, tightening the bolt with more force than necessary. "Hope you're running from something you can outrun, lady." But deep down, Dean knew no one ever really outran their demons. And by the time the first light of dawn bled through the cracked garage windows, and the deep rumble of not one, but two helicopters shook the ground outside, Dean realized he had just pulled someone into his world who would tear it apart in ways he could never have imagined. And nothing about his life would ever be the same again. The thunder of the helicopter blades rattled every rusty bolt and loose panel in Dean's garage. Dust shook loose from the rafters. The old fluorescent lights flickered wildly, and for a split second, Dean thought the whole damn roof might cave in. "What the hell?" he muttered, tossing down his wrench. The girl, still wearing his oversized jacket, sat bolt upright on the mattress, her wide eyes wild with panic. She scrambled to her feet, stumbling as she tried to steady herself. Dean raised his hands, trying to calm her. "Hey, it's all right. Probably just some rich folks lost in the storm, yeah?" He knew it sounded stupid even as he said it. Helicopters? Out here? At the crack of dawn? They weren't lost. They were looking. And judging by the way the woman was shaking, Dean could guess who they were looking for. The garage door shuddered under the force of the wind generated by the rotors. Headlights swept through the cracks around the door as two matte black SUVs skidded into the mud outside. Dean's stomach twisted tighter. "You in some kind of trouble?" he asked under his breath, already reaching for the heavy wrench lying nearby. Not much of a weapon, but it was something. The woman grabbed his arm, her nails digging into his skin. Please don't tell them I'm here," she begged, her voice raw, terrified. "You don't understand. If they find me." The rest of her sentence was drowned out by the mechanical clang of the garage door being wrenched upward from the outside. Dean instinctively stepped between her and the entrance. Through the blinding beams of the headlights, three men in sleek black suits strode in like they owned the place. They looked out of place against the grimy, oil-streaked concrete, like wolves stepping into a slaughterhouse. The tallest one, a man with sharp cheekbones and silver-streaked hair, spoke first. "We're looking for a young woman. About ya high. Dark hair. Might be injured." His voice was calm, but there was an unmistakable threat beneath it. Dean didn't flinch, didn't glance behind him. He stared the man down. "You're trespassing. I suggest you turn around and leave before I call the sheriff." The man smiled, a cold, razor-thin smile. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, sir. We're on private business, and if you help us, you'll be generously compensated." Dean felt the girl trembling behind him, saw the slight shake in her knees out of the corner of his eye. Every instinct screamed at him to step aside, to hand her over and be done with it. Lord knew he needed the money. Hell, one good paycheck could keep his garage afloat another month. But money wasn't everything. He thought of the way she curled up on that cot, like a broken bird. Thought of the way she hadn't even asked for anything. Just a place to exist, just for one night. Dean tightened his grip on the wrench. "Ain't no one here but me," he said, voice flat. "Just a broke mechanic fixing up old junk. You're wasting your time." The man's eyes narrowed. For a heartbeat, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. Then, without warning, one of the suits lunged. Dean reacted faster, swinging the wrench up in a sharp, brutal arc that connected with a sickening crack against the man's arm. The thug cried out, stumbling backward. Before any of them could regroup, Dean grabbed the girl's hand. "Run," he barked. They tore through the side door, boots slipping in the mud. Rain lashed their faces as the wind from the helicopters whipped the world into chaos. Dean didn't look back. He just ran, dragging her behind him, heart pounding in his ears louder than the rotors above. The night wasn't done with them yet, not by a long shot, and Dean was already realizing he hadn't just offered shelter to a stranger. He had thrown himself headfirst into a war he didn't understand, a war that could very well cost him everything. They ran until Dean's lungs burned and his legs threatened to give out. The mud sucked at their boots, the rain blinding them, the deafening chop of helicopter blade the constant reminder that escape wasn't going to be easy, or maybe even possible. Dean yanked the woman around the side of the abandoned gas station across from his garage, pulling her into the narrow space between two crumbling walls. They huddled there, hidden in the shadows, breathing hard. She pressed against the wall, her chest heaving, her face pale and terrified. Dean glanced at her, heart hammering. "You want to tell me what the hell is going on?" he hissed. She shook her head frantically, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. I can't. If I tell you, you'll be in danger too. You already are." Dean let out a low, humorless laugh, wiping rainwater from his face. "Lady, I think it's a little late for that, don't you?" Overhead, searchlights from the helicopters swept across the landscape, slicing through the night like cold knives. Dean ducked lower, pulling her with him. His mind raced. He didn't know her anything, but letting her go, handing her over, felt wrong in a way he couldn't explain, and the look in her eyes, broken, desperate, wasn't something he could walk away from. He cursed under his breath, mind already calculating the few options they had left. "We gotta move," Dean muttered. "If they box us in, we're screwed." She nodded mutely, trembling so badly her teeth chattered. Dean studied her again. Skinny, soaking wet, exhausted beyond belief. She wouldn't last long out here. "Come on," he said, grabbing her hand again, softer this time. "There's an old drainage tunnel under the hill. No one uses it anymore. If we can get there before they spot us." He didn't finish the sentence. Didn't have to. They took off again, moving low and fast. Every step was a gamble, every second a prayer. Dean's boots slipped in the muck, but he never let go of her hand. Behind them, the men in black suits fanned out like hunters. Dean caught glimpses of them through the rain, flashlights slicing through the dark, voices barking orders over radios. The tunnel entrance was just ahead, half hidden by overgrown weeds. Dean shoved the foliage aside, revealing a rusted grate hanging on by a single hinge. He kicked it open and motioned for her to crawl through first. She hesitated, staring at the dark mouth of the tunnel like it might swallow her whole. Dean leaned closer, his voice low but urgent. "Trust me. It's this or we get caught." Something flickered in her eyes, a desperate kind of hope, and then she nodded and scrambled inside. Dean followed, pulling the grate back into place, just as a pair of boots splashed into the puddle where they had been standing seconds before. In the darkness, they huddled close, breathing in the cold, damp air. Dean could feel her shaking beside him, not just from the cold, but from something deeper, a kind of bone-deep fear he recognized. The kind that didn't come from just running. It came from being hunted. He turned to her, voice softer now. Look, I don't know your story, but I'm not the kind of guy who leaves someone behind. Her breath hitched, a choked sound halfway between a sob and a laugh. She leaned her head back against the wall, closing her eyes. My name's Ava, she whispered. I didn't mean for any of this. I didn't mean to drag you into it. Dean smiled grimly in the dark. Yeah, well, life's messy like that. For a long moment, they just sat there in the dark, the world above them raging on, the storm showing no signs of stopping. Dean didn't know what tomorrow would bring. Hell, he didn't know if they'd survive the next hour. But sitting there in the cold, next to a woman who had nowhere left to run, he made a silent promise. He wouldn't let her fight alone, not while he still had breath left in him, even if it cost him everything. They crawled through the tunnel for what felt like forever, the cold mud seeping into Dean's jeans, the darkness pressing against them like a living thing. Every few feet, he glanced back over his shoulder, half expecting to see those suited wolves tearing the grate off and dragging them back into the rain. But somehow, miraculously, they stayed hidden. When they finally emerged on the other side, behind a cluster of thick woods, Dean pulled Ava to her feet, steadying her as she stumbled. She was so cold her lips were turning blue. Dean stripped off his flannel shirt and threw it around her shoulders without a word. He didn't have much left to give, but whatever he had, she could take. They staggered through the trees, the rain thinning to a mist now, the early light of dawn bleeding over the horizon. Dean's mind raced. They needed shelter, a plan, something, anything, to keep moving forward. He found a small maintenance shack near the edge of the woods, half collapsed, abandoned for years. It would have to do. Inside, he sat her down on an old crate and knelt in front of her. You're going to tell me now, he said, keeping his voice low but firm. No more running blind. I need to know what I'm protecting you from. Ava's hands trembled in her lap. She looked away for a long moment, her jaw tight, her shoulders rigid like she was fighting an invisible war inside her own mind. Finally, she spoke. My father, she whispered. Dean blinked. Your father. She nodded, a humorless, bitter sound escaping her lips. You know those men? The ones chasing me? They're his. Private security. He's not just some businessman. She choked on the words. He's a billionaire. Owns half the city. Politicians in his pocket. Judges too. He's untouchable. Dean leaned back on his heels, whistling low under his breath. Damn. Rich people problems, huh? She gave a broken laugh, the sound laced with so much pain it made Dean's chest ache. I was supposed to inherit his empire, she said, voice cracking. But I found out what he really does. Human trafficking. Extortion. Things so dark I can't even. She shook her head violently. I couldn't be part of it. I tried to expose him. I went to the authorities. Thought someone would help. Her eyes locked onto Dean's, hollow and burning at the same time. They didn't. They all worked for him. Everyone. So he made me disappear. Told the world I was unstable, sick. And now. She swallowed hard. Now they're hunting me. To make sure I don't talk again. Dean sat there, feeling like someone had punched him straight through the gut. All the pieces clicked into place. The helicopters. The suits. The desperation. She wasn't just running from a bad situation. She was running from a king who wanted his own daughter buried alive. Dean stood up slowly, his fists clenching at his sides. His blood boiled hotter than it had in years. You picked the wrong mechanic to dump your sins on, sweetheart, he muttered under his breath, voice dark. Ava flinched, thinking he meant her. But Dean shook his head, his eyes fierce now. He crossed the shack in 3 strides, wrenching open a rotted cabinet and pulling out an old hunting rifle. You're not the problem, he said roughly. He is. She stared at him, her mouth falling open slightly. You're really going to help me? Dean checked the chamber, loaded a round with a harsh click, and glanced at her over his shoulder. You're damn right I am. He tossed her one of the old heavy coats hanging by the door. But if we're going to survive this, you gotta trust me. No more running unless I say run. No more secrets. Ava clutched the coat to her chest, her eyes shining with something Dean hadn't seen in a long time. Hope. He nodded grimly. Your old man wants a war. Dean muttered, pulling the door open and staring out into the gray, broken morning. Fine. We'll give him one. And for the first time in years, Dean felt alive. Broken. Angry. But alive. He wasn't just fixing busted engines anymore. He was fixing something bigger. And he wasn't about to back down. Dean led Ava deeper into the woods as the storm finally broke, leaving behind a gray, heavy mist that blanketed everything. Every step they took was a gamble. Every breath they stole felt like defiance. Dean didn't know exactly how to bring down a billionaire who owned half the world, but he didn't know small towns. And he knew one thing rich people always underestimated: loyalty. Dean's garage might have been falling apart, but his name still meant something to the folks around here. The sheriff's son? Dean had fixed his first car for free. The local mechanic's widow. Dean brought groceries every winter when she couldn't make it to town. Old Mr. Lockett, who ran the gas station. Dean once loaned him his last $200 to keep his lights on. Dean and Ava made their way to a backwoods bar on the edge of town, a place where men with oil-streaked hands and worn boots still valued honor more than a paycheck. When Dean pushed open the door, a dozen pairs of eyes turned toward them. At first, silence, suspicion. But then old Buck, burly, scarred, missing 3 fingers from a farming accident, stood up from his stool. He looked at Dean, then at Ava, soaked, shivering, clutching a jacket 3 sizes too big. He saw enough. "You in trouble, boy?" Buck asked, his voice low and rough. Dean nodded once. "Real bad trouble." Buck grunted. "Well, trouble's something we know how to handle." One by one, the men and women in the bar stood up. No questions, no demands, just loyalty. The kind of loyalty money could never buy. Within an hour, Dean had a plan. Ava sat at a corner table, quietly sipping hot coffee someone shoved into her hands, watching in awe as these strangers, these rough, tough strangers, rallied around a girl they didn't even know. Because Dean asked them to. That night, when the helicopters came back, low and slow over the woods, they didn't find 2 scared fugitives. They found 20 trucks blocking every path out of town. They found old hunting rifles aimed steady from barn windows. They found a community that had drawn a line in the mud and said, "Not today." Dean stood in front of Ava, shotgun resting casually against his shoulder as the black SUVs rolled up once more. This time, the suits didn't look so confident. This time, they hesitated. The silver-haired man got out first, smoothing his expensive coat. He didn't smile this time. He just stared at Dean, cold fury simmering in his eyes. "You have no idea who you're messing with," he said quietly. Dean didn't flinch. He jerked his chin toward the woods. "Funny, I was about to say the same thing." The standoff stretched, seconds ticking like gunshots in the heavy air. Then, behind Dean, the sheriff's truck pulled up, siren silent but lights flashing. Dean had made another call that morning. A risky one, but he gambled right. Not everyone was in the billionaire's pocket. Not everyone could be bought. The sheriff, a grizzled man with sharp eyes and no patience for bull, climbed out, shotgun slung lazily over his arm. He walked straight up to the silver-haired man and said, "Got your warrants? Got your probable cause?" When the man stayed silent, the sheriff's smile turned wolfish. "No." "Then I suggest you and your boys turn around before I start asking uncomfortable questions to very important people." For a long, terrifying moment, Dean thought the man might call the bluff. But even the rich knew when they were outnumbered. The silver-haired man's lips curled in disgust. He turned sharply, signaled to his men. One by one, the SUVs peeled away into the mist. The helicopters lifted off, thundering into the sky. Gone. Dean let out a slow, shaking breath, the weight of the last 2 days crashing into his bones. It was over. For now. Ava sagged against the truck, burying her face in her hands. Tears, not of fear this time, but relief, shook her thin frame. Dean went to her, crouching down, laying a hand gently on her shoulder. "You're safe," he murmured. "You're going to be okay." She lifted her head, tears cutting tracks down her cheeks. "How do I even begin to repay you?" she whispered. Dean gave a tired, crooked smile. "You don't. That's not how this works. Because sometimes kindness wasn't about debts. It wasn't about who owed who. It was about doing the right thing, even when it cost you, even when it hurt." And as the mist cleared and the first rays of sunlight broke through the trees, Dean realized something he hadn't felt in a long, long time. Hope. He wasn't just a struggling mechanic anymore. He was something else. Something stronger. Something better. And as Ava smiled back at him, small, broken, but real, he knew. Maybe, just maybe, he had saved more than her. Maybe he had saved himself, too.